Fancy, said Miss Peavy, if I had not had a headache and come back early, we should never have had this little chat. She gazed up at Smith in her gentle, wistful way as they started together down the broad gravel drive. A timid, soulful little thing she looked. No, said Smith. It was not a gushing reply, but he was not feeling at his sunniest. The idea that Miss Peavy might return from Bridgeford in advance of the main body had not occurred to him. As he would have said himself, he had confused the unlikely with the impossible. And the result had been that she had caught him beyond hope of retreat as he sat in his garden chair and thought of Eve Halliday, who on her return from the lake had been seized with a fresh spasm of conscience and had gone back to the library to put in another hour's work before dinner. To decline Miss Peavy's invitation to accompany her down the drive, in order to see if there were any signs of those who had been doing honour to the late Hartley Reddish MP, had been out of the question. But Smith, though he went without pleasure. Every moment he spent in her society tended to confirm him more and more in the opinion that Miss Peavy was the curse of the species. "And I have been so longing," continued his companion, "to have a nice long talk. All these days I felt that I haven't been able to get as near to you as I would wish." "Well, of course, with the others always about. I meant in a spiritual sense, of course." "I see. I wanted so much to discuss your wonderful poetry with you. You haven't so much as mentioned your work since you came here, have you?" "Ah, but you see, I am trying to keep my mind off it." "Really? Why?" "My medical adviser warned me that I had been concentrating a trifle too much. He offered me the choice, in fact, between a complete rest and the loony bin." "The what, Mr. McTodd?" "The lunatic asylum," he meant. These medical men express themselves oddly. "But surely then you ought not to dream of trying to compose if it's as bad as that. And you told Lord Emsworth that you wished to stay at home this afternoon to write a poem." Her glance showed nothing but tender solicitude, but inwardly Miss Peavy was telling herself that would hold him for a while. "True," said Smith, "true. But you know what art is, an inexorable mistress. The inspiration came, and I felt that I must take the risk, but it has left me weak. "You big stiff," thought Miss Peavy, but not aloud. They walked on a few steps. "In fact," said Smith, with another inspiration, "I'm not sure I ought now to be going back and resting." Miss Peavy eyed a clump of bushes some dozen yards further down the drive. They were quivering slightly, as though they sheltered some alien body, and Miss Peavy, whose temper was apt to be impatient, registered resolve to tell Edward Coutts that if he couldn't hide behind a bush without dancing about like a cat on hot bricks, he'd better give up his profession, take to selling jellied eels. In which, it may be mentioned, she wronged her old friend. He had been as still as a statue until a moment before, when a large and excitable beetle had fallen down the space between his collar and his neck, an experience which might well have tried the subtlest woodsman. "Oh, please don't go in yet," said Miss Peavy. "It is such a lovely evening. Hark to the music of the breeze in the tree-tops, so soothing, like a faraway harp. I wonder if it is whispering secrets to the birds." Smith forbore to follow her into this region of speculation, and they walked past the bushes in silence. Some little distance further on, however, Miss Peavy seemed to relent. "You are looking tired, Mr. McTodd," she said anxiously. "I'm afraid you really have been overtaxing your strength. Perhaps, after all, you had better go back and lie down." "Oh, you think so?" "I'm sure of it. I will just stroll on to the gates and see if the car is in sight." "I feel that I'm deserting you." "Oh, please," said Miss Peavy deprecatingly. With something of the feelings of a long-sentence convict unexpectedly released immediately on his arrival in jail, Smith retraced his steps. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw that Miss Peavy had disappeared around a bend in the drive, and he paused to light a cigarette. He had just thrown away the match and was walking on, well content with life, when a voice behind him said, "Hey!" and the well-remembered form of Mr. Edward Coutts stepped out of the bushes. "See this?" said Mr. Coutts, exhibiting his revolver. "I do indeed, Comrade Coutts," replied Smith, "and if it is not an untimely question, what is the idea?" "That," said Mr. Coutts, "is just in case you try any funny business." And replacing the weapon in a handy pocket, he proceeded to slap vigorously at the region between his shoulder blades. He also wriggled, with not a little animation. Smith watched these manoeuvres gravely. "You did not stop me at pistol's point merely to watch you go through your Swedish exercises," he said. Mr. Coutts paused for an instant. "I got a beetle or something down my back," he explained curtly. "Ah, then, as you will naturally wish to be alone in such a sad moment, I'll be bidding you a cordial good evening and strolling on." "No, you don't." "Don't I?" said Smith resignedly. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps you are right." Mr. Coutts replaced the revolver once more. "I take it then, Comrade Coutts, that you would have speech with me. Carry on, old friend. Get it off your diaphragm. What seems to be on your mind?" A lucky blow appeared to have stunned Mr. Coutts's beetle, and he was able to give his full attention to the matter in hand. He stared at Smith with considerable distaste. "I'm on to you, Bill," he said. "My name is not Bill," said Smith. "No," snapped Mr. Coutts, his annoyance by this time very manifest, "and it's not McTodd." Smith looked at his companion thoughtfully. This was an unforeseen complication, and for the moment he would readily have admitted that he saw no way of overcoming it. That the other was in no genial frame of mind towards him, the expression on his face would have showed, even if his actions had not been sufficient indication of the fact. Mr. Coutts, having disposed of his beetle, and being now at leisure to concentrate his whole attention on Smith, was eyeing that immaculate young man with a dislike that he did not attempt to conceal. "Shall we be strolling on?" suggested Smith. "Walking may assist thought. At the moment I am free to confess that you have opened up a subject which causes me some perplexity. I think, Comrade Coutts, having given the position of affairs a careful examination, that we may say that the next move is with you. What do you propose to do about it?" "I'd like," said Mr. Coutts with asperity, "to beat your block off." "No doubt, but I'd like to knock you for a goal." Smith discouraged these utopian dreams with a deprecating wave of his hand. "I can readily understand it," he said courteously, "but to keep within the sphere of practical politics, what is the actual move which you contemplate? You could expose me, no doubt, to my host, but I cannot see how that would profit you." "I know that, but you can remember I've got that up my sleeve in case you try any funny business." "You persist in harping on that possibility, Comrade Coutts. The idea seems to be an obsession with you. I can assure you that I contemplate no such thing. What, to return to the point, do you intend to do?" They had reached the broad expanse opposite the front door, where the drive, from being a river, spread out into a lake of gravel. Smith stopped. "You've got to get me into this joint," said Mr. Coots. I feared that was what you were about to suggest. In my peculiar position, I have naturally no choice but to endeavour to carry out your wishes. Any attempt not to do so would, I imagine, infallibly strike so keen a critic as yourself as funny business. But how can I get you into what you breezily describe as this joint? Well, you can say I'm a friend of yours and ask them to invite me. Smith shook his head gravely. Not one of your brightest suggestions, Comrade Coots. Tactfully refraining from stressing the point that an instant lowering of my prestige would inevitably ensue should it be supposed that you were a friend of mine, I will merely mention that, being myself merely a guest in this stately home of England, I can hardly go about inviting my chums here for indefinite visits. No, we must find another way. You're sure you want to stay? Oh, quite so, quite so. I merely asked. Now, let us think. Through the belt of rhododendrons which jutted out from one side of the castle, a portly form at this point made itself visible, moving high and disposedly in the direction of the back premises. It was Beach, the butler, returning from the pleasant ramble in which he had indulged himself on the departure of his employer and the rest of the party. Revived by some gracious hours in the open air, Beach was returning to duty. And with the sight of him, there came to Smith a neat solution of the problem confronting him. "Oh, Beach," he called. "Sir?" responded a fruity voice. There was a brief pause while the butler navigated into the open. He removed the straw hat, which he had donned for his excursion, and enfolded Smith in a pop-eyed but not unkindly gaze. A thoughtful critic of country house humanity, he had long since decided that he approved of Smith. Since Lady Constance had first begun to offer the hospitality of the castle to the literary and artistic world, he had been profoundly shocked by some of the rare and curious specimens who had nodded their disordered locks and flaunted their ill-cut evening clothes at the dinner table over which he presided. And Smith had come as a pleasant surprise. "Sorry to trouble you, Beach." "Oh, not at all, sir." "This," said Smith, indicating Mr. Coots, who was viewing the scene with a wary and suspicious eye, an eye obviously alert for any signs of funny business, "is my man. My valet, you know. He's just arrived from town. I had to leave him behind to attend to the bedside of a sick aunt. Your aunt was better when you came away, Coots?" he inquired graciously. Mr. Coots correctly interpreted this question as a feeler with regard to his views on this new development, and decided to accept the situation. True, he had hoped to enter the castle in a slightly higher capacity than that of a gentleman's personal gentleman, but he was an old campaigner. Once in, as he put it to himself, with admirable common sense, he would be in. "Yes, sir," he replied. "Capital," said Smith. "Capital. Then you will look after Coots, Beach." "Very good, sir," said the butler, in a voice of cordial approval. The only point he had found to cavil at in Smith had been removed, for it had hitherto pained him a little that a gentleman with so nice a taste in clothes as that dignified guest should have embarked on a visit to such a place as Blandings Castle without a personal attendant. Now all was explained, and as far as Beach was concerned, forgiven. He proceeded to escort Mr. Coots to the rear. They disappeared behind the rhododendrons. They had hardly gone when a sudden thought came to Smith as he sat once more in the coolness in the hall. He pressed the bell. Strange, he reflected, how one overlooked these obvious things. That was how generals lost battles. "Sir," said Beach, appearing through the green baize door. "Sorry to trouble you again, Beach." "Not at all, sir." "I hope you'll make Coots comfortable. I think you will like him. When you get to know him, is a very winning personality. He seems a nice young fellow, sir. Oh, by the way, Beach, you might ask him if he brought my revolver from town with him. Yes, sir, said Beach, who would have scorned to betray emotion if it had been a Lewis gun. I think I saw it sticking out of his pocket. You might bring it to me, will you? Very good, sir. Beach retired, to return a moment later. On the silver salver which he carried, the lethal weapon was duly reposing. Your revolver, sir, said Beach. Thank you, said Smith. For some moments after the butler had withdrawn, in his stately, pigeon-toed way through the green baize door, Smith lay back in his chair with the feeling that something attempted, something done, had earned a night's repose. He was not so sanguine as to suppose that he had actually checkmated an adversary of Mr. Coates's strenuousness by the simple act of removing a revolver from his possession, but there was no denying the fact that the feel of the thing in his pocket engendered a certain cosy satisfaction. The little he had seen of Mr. Coates had been enough to convince him that the other man, who was far better off without an automatic pistol. There was an impulsiveness about his character which did not go well with the possession of firearms. Smith's meditations had taken him thus far when they were interrupted by an imperative voice. Hey! Only one person of Smith's acquaintance was in the habit of opening his remarks in this manner. It was consequently no surprise to him to find Mr. Edward Coates standing at his elbow. Hey! All right, Comrade Coates, said Smith, with a touch of austerity. I heard you the first time. And may I remind you that this habit of yours, of popping out from unexpected places and saying, hey, is one which should be overcome. Valets are supposed to wait till rung for. At least I think so. I must confess that until this moment I have never had a valet. And you wouldn't have one now if I could help it, responded Mr. Coates. Smith raised his eyebrows. Why, he inquired, surprised, this peevishness? Don't you like being a valet? No, I don't. You astonish me. I should have thought you'd have gone singing about the house. Have you considered that the tenancy of such a position throws you into the constant society of Comrade Beach, than whom it would be difficult to imagine a more delightful companion? Old stiff, said Mr. Coates sourly. If there's one thing that makes me tired, it's a guy that talks about his darned stomach all the time. I beg your pardon? The beach gook, explained Mr. Coates, has got something wrong with the lining of his stomach, and if I hadn't made a getaway, he'd be talking about it yet. If you fail to find entertainment and uplift in the first-hand information about Comrade Beach's stomach, you must indeed be hard to please. I am to take it, then, that you came snorting out here, interrupting my daydreams, merely in order to seek my sympathy. Mr. Coates gazed upon him with a smouldering eye. I came to tell you I suppose you think you're darned smart. And very nice of you too, said Smith, touched. A pretty compliment, for which I'm not ungrateful. You got that gun away from me mighty smoothly, didn't you? Well, since you mention it, yes. And now I suppose you think you're going to slip in ahead of me and get away with that necklace. Well, say, listen, let me tell you, it'll take someone better than a half-baked string bean like you to put one over on me. I seem, said Smith, pained, to detect a certain animus creeping into your tone. Surely we can be trade rivals without this spirit of hostility. My attitude towards you is one of kindly tolerance. Even if you get it, where do you think you're going to hide it? And believe me, it'll take some hiding. Say, let me tell you something. I'm your valet, ain't I? Well then, I can come into your room and be tidying up whenever I darn please, can't I? Sure I can. I tell the world I can do just that little thing, and you take it from me, Bill. Oh, you persist in the delusion that my name is William. You take it from me, Bill, that if ever that necklace disappears, and it isn't me that's done the disappearing, you'll find me tidying up in a way that'll make you dizzy. I'll go through that room of yours with a fine-toothed comb, so chew on that, will you?" And Edward Coutts, moving sombrely across the hall, made a sinister exit. The mood of cool reflection was still to come, when he would realise that, in his desire to administer what he would have described as a hot one, he had acted a little rashly in putting his enemy on his guard. All he was thinking now was that his brief sketch of the position of affairs would have the effect of diminishing Smith's complacency a trifle. He had, he flattered himself, slipped over something that could be classed as a jolt. Nor was he unjustified in this view. The aspect of the matter on which he had touched was one that had not previously presented itself to Smith, and musing on it, as he settled himself in his chair, he could see that it afforded food for thought. As regarded the disposal of the necklace, should it ever come into his possession, he had formed no definite plan. He had assumed that he would conceal it somewhere until the first excitement of the chase slackened, and it was only now that he realized the difficulty of finding a suitable hiding place outside his bedroom. Yes, it was certainly a matter on which, as Mr. Coutts had suggested, he would do well to chew. For 10 minutes, accordingly, he did so. And it being practically impossible to keep a good man down, at the end of that period, he was rewarded with an idea. He rose from his chair and pressed the bell. "Ah, Beach," he said affably as the green baize door swung open. "I must apologise once more for troubling you. I keep ringing, don't I?" "No trouble at all, sir," responded the butler paternally. "But if you are ringing to summon your personal attendant, I fear he is not immediately available. He left me somewhat abruptly a few moments ago. I was not aware that you would be requiring his services until the dressing gong sounded, or I would have detained him." "Never mind. It was you I wished to see, Beach," said Smith. "I'm concerned about you. I learned from my man that the lining of your stomach is not at all as it should be." "That is true, sir," replied Beach, an excited gleam coming into his dull eyes. He shivered slightly, as might a war-horse at the sound of the bugle. "I do have trouble with the lining of my stomach." "Every stomach has a silver lining." "Sir?" "I said, tell me all about it." "Well, really, sir," said Beach wistfully. "To please me," urged Smith. "Well, sir, it is extremely kind of you to take an interest. It generally starts with a dull shooting pain on the right side of the abdomen from 20 minutes to half an hour after the conclusion of a meal. The symptoms—" There was nothing but courteous sympathy in Smith's gaze as he listened to what sounded like an eyewitness's account of the San Francisco earthquake. But inwardly he was wishing that his companion could see his way to making it a bit briefer and snappier. However, all things come to an end. Even the weariest river winds somewhere to the sea. With a moving period, the butler finally concluded his narrative. "Park's pepsinine," said Smith promptly. "Sir?" "That's what you want, Park's pepsinine. It would set you right in no time." "I will make a note of the name, sir. The specific has not come to my notice until now, and if I may say so," added Beach with a glassy but adoring look at his benefactor, "I should like to express my gratitude for your kindness." "Not at all, Beach, not at all. Oh, Beach," he said, as the other started to manoeuvre towards the door, "I've just remembered there was something else I wanted to talk to you about." "Yes, sir?" "I thought it might be as well to speak to you about it before approaching Lady Constance. The fact is, Beach, I am feeling cramped." "Indeed, sir? I forgot to mention that one of the symptoms from which I suffer is a sharp cramp." "Oh, too bad. But let us, if you do not mind, shelve for the moment the subject of your interior organism and its ailments. When I say I am feeling cramped, I mean spiritually. Have you ever written poetry, Beach?" "No, sir." "Ah, then it may be a little difficult for you to understand my feelings. My trouble is this. Out in Canada, Beach, I grew accustomed to doing my work in the most solitary surroundings. You remember that passage in my Songs of Squalor which begins, "Across the pale parabola of joy"? Oh, I fear, sir. Oh, you missed it. Oh, tough luck. Try to get hold of it sometime. It's a bird. Well, that passage was written in a lonely hut on the banks of the Saskatchewan, miles away from human habitation. I am like that beach. I need the stimulus of the great open spaces. When I'm surrounded by my fellows, inspiration slackens and dies. You know how it is when there are people about. Just as you're starting in to write a nifty, someone comes and sits down on the desk and begins talking about himself. Every time you get going nicely, in barges some alien influence, and the muse goes bluey. You see what I mean? Yes, sir, said Beach, gaping slightly. Well, that's why for a man like me, existence in Blandings Castle has its drawbacks. I've got to get a place where I can be alone, Beach. Alone with my dreams and visions. Some little eyrie perched on the cliffs of time. In other words, do you know of an empty cottage somewhere on the estate where I could betake myself when in the mood and swing a nib without any possibility of being interrupted? A little cottage, sir? A little cottage with honeysuckle over the door and old Mr. Moon climbing up above the trees. A cottage, Beach, where I can meditate, where I can turn the key in the door and bid the world go by. Now that the castle is going to be full of all these people who are coming for the county ball, it is imperative that I wangle such a haven. Otherwise, a considerable slab of priceless poetry will be lost to humanity for ever. You desire, said Beach, feeling his way cautiously, a small cottage where you can write poetry, sir? You follow me like a leopard. Do you know of such a one? There is an unoccupied gamekeeper's cottage in the West Wood, sir, but it is an extremely humble place. Be it never so humble, it will do for me. Do you think Lady Constance would be offended if I were to ask for the loan of it for a few days? I fancy that her ladyship would receive the quest with equanimity, sir. She's not unaccustomed. Well, I can only say, sir, that there was a literary gentleman visiting the castle last summer who expressed a desire to take sun-baths in the garden each morning before breakfast. In the nude, sir. And beyond instructing me to warn the maids, her ladyship placed no obstacle in the way of the fulfilment of his wishes. So a modest request like mine isn't likely to cause a heart attack. Admirable. You don't know what it means to me to feel that I shall soon have a little refuge of my own, to which I can retreat and be in solitude. I can imagine that it must be extremely gratifying, sir. Then I will put the motion before the board directly Lady Constance returns. Very good, sir. I should like to splash it on the record once more, Beach, that I am much obliged to you for your sympathy and advice in this matter. I knew you would not fail me. Not at all, sir. I'm only too glad to have been able to be of assistance. Oh, and Beach, sir, just one other thing. Will you be seeing Coots, my valet, again shortly? Quite shortly, sir, I should imagine. Then would you mind just prodding him smartly in the lower ribs? Sir, cried Beach, startled out of his butlerian calm. He swallowed a little convulsively. For 18 months and more, ever since Lady Constance Keble had first begun to cast her fly and hook over the murky water of the artistic world, and jerk its denizens onto the pile carpets of Blandings Castle, Beach had had his fill of eccentricity. But until this moment he had hoped that Smith was going to prove an agreeable change from the stream of literary lunatics who had been coming and going all that weary time. And lo, Smith's name led all the rest. Even the man who had come for a week in April and wanted to eat jam with his fish paled in comparison. Prod him in the ribs, sir, he quavered. Prod him in the ribs, said Smith firmly, and at the same time whisper in his ear the word, aha. Beach licked his dry lips. Aha, sir? Aha, and say it came from me. Very good, sir. The matter shall be attended to, said Beach, and with a muffled sound that was half a sigh, half a death rattle, He tottered through the green baize door.